Let's do something cool. I want you to think about one happy memory from your childhood. What colors stand out? What kind of sounds do you hear? What does it smell like? What do you feel? Really focus on that memory. Now let me let you in on a little secret. Did you think you were remembering that event? If you did, you're wrong. In fact, what you're remembering is the last time you thought about that memory. You're remembering a memory, not an event. Interesting, right? The next time you think about that event, it will be that much clearer because of RFM, and it also illustrates the importance of this week's reading strategy: visualizing. What is visualizing? When we visualize, it means we pull from our five senses to create a movie in our minds. We pay attention to the 5 types of sensory details authors use to describe the text. They add details to make their writing more interesting, and those details allow us to use our imagination when we're reading. While writers most often use details to explain to a reader how something looks, they also use details that describe how something feels, smells, sounds, and even occasionally how it tastes. As readers, we should take these details and use our imagination to see in our head how something is described. Why is visualizing important? When we visualize, we are engaging with the text and thinking about what we're reading. Readers who say they use books to escape the real world likely have strong visualization skills. The details allow them to feel as if they're part of the story. It's important to remember that visualizing isn't just for fictional texts, though. Visualizing while we're reading nonfiction is just as important. Nonfiction writers use details in the same way fiction writers do when they're writing a story. Think about a brochure to persuade you to travel to the Hawaiian Islands. The author is going to want you to be able to imagine visiting there just as much as a fiction writer would want you to feel as if you're part of a story. But visualizing is an important part of the reading process for another reason. And to understand that, we should take a minute to talk about how we learn. Science has discovered that most learning happens through 3 different types of experiences. Some people are auditory learners, which means they learn best by hearing. These learners understand new information the best when someone explains it to them, such as listening to a teacher in class. Other people are kinesthetic learners, which means they learn best by doing. These learners understand new information the best when they experience it firsthand by doing something that involves movement, such as taking notes or practicing it themselves. The third type of learners are visual learners, which means they learn best by seeing. These learners understand new information the best when they see it, like when your teachers write notes on the board or incorporates pictures or videos to explain it. Hopefully you've taken a learning styles assessment this year and know which type of learner you are. Most people have a preference for one in particular, but use a combination of all 3 styles. And this is why visualizing is important. When we read, we're learning through sight. We're seeing the words on the page. But you see thousands of words every day. What is going to help you remember those words is picturing what they're saying in your head. When we visualize, or use our imagination, we're seeing the text in a different way. Rather than just understanding and remembering the words, it'll be easier for us to understand and remember the pictures our brains form from the words. This is why we should visualize every time we read, whether we're reading fiction, like a novel or short story, or nonfiction, like a textbook or news article. How do we visualize? When we read, we need to pay attention to our 5 senses. The author often describes how something looks, feels, tastes, smells, and sounds, but we can also use our imagination to fill in other details too. Basically, we take the details in the text and use them to see in our head what is happening. Sometimes visualizing will mean that we create images based on the details the author gives us, like remembering the mixed smells of barbecue, popsicles, and sulfur from fireworks when reading about a 4th of July party. Visualizing could also mean using our imagination to fill in unmentioned details, like picturing a story about high school students taking place in the halls of Revis, even though the high school isn't actually described in the story. Other times, visualizing could mean imagining ourselves in a scene we're reading about, like imagining how we'd feel if enemy soldiers were marching into our town. Visualizing can heighten the emotions we feel when reading, like imagining a lost kitten huddled under a bush during a rainstorm and feeling sad and sympathetic at the sight. Or visualizing could mean that we make connections to relate what we're reading to our own experiences, like picturing a character in the story as having similar features or characteristics to someone we know in real life. Whether we're using the author's details or filling in our own with our imagination, we need to visualize every time we read. Sometimes visualizing will happen naturally, and other times we might have to work a little harder to train our brain to do this. If you notice that you're not visualizing, pause and ask yourself, what would this look like, sound like, smell like, feel like, or taste like? What are some examples? Now that we have a good idea of what visualizing is, why it's important, and how to use it, let's take a look at some examples. Put your visualization skills to use as we read Edwin Morgan's poem, Strawberries. Use your imagination to see what is happening in the poem. There were never strawberries like the ones we had that sultry afternoon, sitting on the step of the open French window. Facing each other, your knees held in mine, the blue plates in our laps, the strawberries glistening in the hot sunlight. We dipped them in sugar, looking at each other, not hurrying the feast for one to come. The empty plates laid on the stone together with two forks crossed, and I bent towards you. Sweet in that air in my arms, abandoned like a child. From your eager mouth, the taste of strawberries in my memory. Lean back again. Let me love you. Let the sun beat on our forgetfulness 1 hour of all the heat intense and summer lightning on the Kilpatrick Hills. Let the storm wash the plates. In this case, visualizing would help us understand the poem better. Think back to the images you saw in your imagination when reading the poem. Now think about those images as you answer this question. Was the purpose of this poem to describe strawberries? Hopefully you said no. So what was this poem about then? You might say it was about a pair of lovers spending time together, eating strawberries on a hot summer day. You might have been able to see the two sitting close together on a porch overlooking hills. You could hear lightning and thunder as the storm grew closer. You could feel the hot sun, and you could smell and taste the sugar-covered strawberries. In this instance, the author provided a lot of sensory details for you to use, and hopefully it helped you understand the poem better. Let's try again. You are reading about the style of pop art in your art class. Use your visualization skills to imagine the art that is described. Pop art is an artistic movement from the 1950s and 1960s where artists used everyday images from popular culture as inspiration for their work. One of these artists, Roy Lichtenstein, is known for his comic book style paintings and drawings. Lichtenstein's work is instantly recognizable as it incorporates images styled after comic books from the same time period, including thick black lines to outline major shapes, bold solid colors, and the use of Ben-Day dots, small, evenly spaced dots, to create different shades and textures in his images. The result was a piece of art that looked as if it had been taken from a page in a comic book. As you read this nonfiction text, did you use your imagination to try and understand what Roy Lichtenstein's art looked like? Imagine what a picture of a blonde woman's face would look like if Roy Lichtenstein had created it in the comic book style described in the text. Thick black lines, solid colors, Ben-Day dots. Did you imagine something like this? Now, it doesn't matter if you imagined this exact image, but if you did imagine a blonde woman's face outlined in thick black lines, bold solid colors, and using dots to shade some areas, then you practiced visualizing. Recap. Visualizing means to pull from our five senses to create a movie in our mind. Visualizing helps us understand and remember the pictures we form in our head rather than just the words on the page, so we need to make it a habit of visualizing every time we read. Sometimes this will mean using the details the author provides to describe how something looks, sounds, feels, smells, or tastes, and other times we will need to use our imagination to fill in some of the details that aren't described as clearly. That wraps up our flipped lesson on visualizing. If you have any questions about this strategy, feel free to watch all or part of the video again, or ask your teacher when you return to class. Click the link in the description box below to access a Google form for this lesson.